what evil lurks in the hearts of men. The shadow knows.
What do we have here? There's Donald Trump. Who is that man that Donald Trump is scooted up real close to? Oh yeah, that is the notorious child trafficking pedophile Jeffrey Epstein, the man who used to fly people on the Lolita Express to his sex slave island, where he hosted people like Bill Clinton, letting them come and have sex with minors. But oh, no, Donald Trump's not friends with Jeffrey Epstein, right? Well, I found this little article from the New York Magazine that was written back in 2002. Here's what Donald Trump had to say about his buddy Jeff Epstein. I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. No doubt about it. Jeffrey enjoys his social life. Move along, folks. Nothing to see here. Donald Trump back in 2002 was clearly just engaging in some very serious 4D chessmanship. It's not like Donald Trump has a thing for, I don't know, illegal sex, right?
By the way, your daughter, she's beautiful. Can I say this? A piece of ass. Yeah. She looks more voluptuous than ever.
She's actually always been very voluptuous. She's tall. She's almost 6 feet tall.
What's the favorite thing you have in common with your father?
Either real estate or golf.
Donald, with your daughter?
Well, I was going to say sex, but I can't relate that. Said that if Ivanka weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her. You know?
Stop it! Oh, it's so weird. Stop. You know what? You are sick.
Donald Trump repeatedly points out how hot his daughter is, saying last year in a Rolling Stone article, "Yeah, she's really something, and what a beauty, that one. If I weren't happily married and, you know, her father."
My daughter, Ivanka.
Yeah.
She's 6 feet tall. She's got the best body.
Yeah, she's hot.
and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad. I don't want you to protest. I don't want you to riot. I don't want you to write to your congressman because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value.
Please give us your name. Jeffrey Epstein.
Because not only are we now talking about a man who is a very wealthy American man. He is a hedge fund manager. He, at the time, was a well-known Wall Street financier, worth allegedly $2 billion. And his case, when I started to investigate, had over 24 kids that had reported to the police sexual abuse by him and by a number of procurers, none of whom have been indicted to this day.
Jeffrey Epstein? Who is this? What is the Lolita Express? What is it?
She's known as Jane Doe number 5. After years of silence, she's talking about the day she says Jeffrey Epstein paid her for a sensual massage. Jane says she was just a sophomore in high school.
Jeffrey Edward Epstein is a level 3 sex offender, billionaire, self-proclaimed founder of the Clinton Global Initiative, and international man of mystery. In 2008, Epstein was convicted of solicitation of an underage girl for prostitution. Since his conviction, Epstein has been identified by 30 to 40 different victims who allege that he used them as sex slaves in a global child sex trafficking network. In spite of these suits, the large body of evidence, the graphic nature of the cases, and intense public interest, however, Epstein remains largely elusive and has so far only served 13 months in prison for his actions. In addition, Epstein has never been charged with trafficking, a federal crime with a minimum sentence of 20 years. The purpose of this film is not only to shed some light on the highly enigmatic character that is Jeffrey Epstein, but also his victims, particularly Virginia Roberts. Ultimately, I would like to demonstrate that the Non-Prosecution Agreement, which has protected Epstein and his co-conspirators for all these years, is void, and he should indeed be faced with federal charges of human trafficking. There is no federal statute of limitations for crimes involving human trafficking, in addition to his criminal activities after his arrest. It is meant as a comprehensive historical account of an otherwise greatly misunderstood series of events. In Part 1, we will examine Epstein's background, how he acquired all of his political connections and massive wealth. Part 2 will bring us to his criminal trial and conviction. And Part 3 will examine the cases of the many Jane Does involved in civil suits. In Part 4, we'll briefly look at the most likely co-conspirators protected from prosecution by Epstein's Non-Prosecution Agreement. Finally, Part 5 will tell the story of Virginia Roberts, Epstein's most outspoken victim. We'll use the evidence provided in the trials, as well as court decisions, to determine the veracity of her highly controversial claims. Jeffrey Edward Epstein was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1953 to a middle-class Jewish family. Although he had never earned a college degree, Epstein taught calculus and physics at the Dalton School in Manhattan from 1973 to 1975. While he was teaching, Epstein met Alan C. Greenberg, then a chairman of the investment bank Bear Stearns. By 1976, Epstein had become an options trader at Bear Stearns, and by 1980 he had become a limited partner. Epstein would abruptly leave Bear Stearns, however, and in 1982 founded a rival investment firm named J. Epstein and Company. Epstein stated that this was because he wanted to be his own boss and deal exclusively with billionaire clients. Less than a month of his leaving, however, Epstein was investigated by the SEC for his involvement in insider trading while at Bear Stearns. During this time, Epstein described himself to his associates as a, quote, bounty hunter, end quote, who was able to track and reclaim lost and stolen money for governments and wealthy individuals. Epstein's ability to turn profits through any means necessary earned him enough prestige to become a member of such organizations as the Trilateral Commission and Council on Foreign Relations. Also during this time, Epstein began developing a close relationship with Stephen Jude Hoffenberg, then head of Towers Financial Corporation and owner of the New York Post. Throughout the 1980s, these men remained close friends, end quote, traveled everywhere together, end quote. Hoffenberg also involved Epstein in a number of financial activities that were later discovered to be fraudulent or outright illegal. After a number of investigations, Hoffenberg was eventually sentenced to 20 years in prison for conducting, quote, one of the largest Ponzi schemes in history, end quote. Despite implicating Epstein multiple times in the case, Epstein was never held accountable for his involvement in Towers Financial Corporation's unprecedented fraud. Epstein's ruthless activities with J. Epstein and Company continued into the 1990s. During this period, he was close with Lex Wessner, the founder of the Limited clothing stores, and was employed by the company to correct bad investments, fire employees on their behalf, and assist in the acquisition of other companies like Abercrombie & Fitch. Aside from Wexner, however, Epstein was not well received by the company. One employee at the Limited said during this time, quote, almost everyone at the Limited wondered who Epstein was. He literally came out of nowhere, end quote. Robert Morosky, a former vice chairman of the Limited, said, quote, everyone was mystified as to what his appeal was, end quote. Regardless of personal opinions, he was apparently quite successful during this period with Wexner. Not only did he acquire his home in Palm Beach, Florida, that would later become the epicenter for his case, but he also purchased the, quote, largest private residence in New York, quote. During this time, he also purchased his infamous island, Little St. James, located in the U.S. Virgin Islands. This was apparently the, quote, highest-priced non-commercial real estate transaction in Virgin Islands history, end quote. Epstein also purchased his infamous Boeing 727, which was to become known as the Lolita Express. In the early 2000s, Jeffrey Epstein began to develop a relationship with Bill Clinton, immediately following his presidency. On February 9, 2002, Clinton first appears in Epstein's pilot logs as having been on the Lolita Express between Miami and New York. But he also appears at least 26 other times in the pilot's logs on trips to locations all over the world. At least one time, Clinton even flew with Epstein and Kevin Spacey, who's now embroiled in his own child sex abuse scandal. In the early 2000s, Jeffrey Epstein also became a close associate of Jean-Luc Brunel, a modeling scout who founded MC2 Models. Not only did Jean-Luc Brunel fly with Epstein to Little St. James, but Epstein also invested $1 million in 2005 to help start MC2 Models. Brunel would later be identified by Virginia Roberts as one of the individuals who provided teenage girls to Jeffrey Epstein. In addition, it was revealed in a 1988 60 Minutes special that several models claimed they were drugged and raped by Brunel himself. This brings us to 2005, when the first known police report was filed against Epstein. In March, a woman contacted Palm Beach police and alleged her 14-year-old stepdaughter, Haley Robson, had been taken to Jeffrey Epstein's mansion by an older girl, and paid $300 to strip and massage him. The highly unusual trial that followed ended with Epstein's conviction and the subsequent release of information contained in this film. After the police report in March 2005, Haley Robson was interviewed further. Robson told police in a sworn statement that she had also taken at least 6 other girls between 14 and 16 years of age to Epstein's home for similar erotic massages. Police then interviewed 5 other victims who made claims of similar sexual abuse at Epstein's mansion. Investigators began expanding their questioning to Epstein's employees and found that 2 stated young-looking girls showed up to perform massages 2 or 3 times a day when Epstein was in town. Another employee was told to send a dozen roses to one teenage girl after a high school drama performance. Epstein had also arranged for hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, rental cars, and more to be given to various girls. Police also searched Epstein's home, in which they found many photos of naked, young-looking girls and an assortment of hidden cameras. The search and subsequent surveillance of Epstein included undercover officers and was over 11 months long. The evidence was quickly mounting against Jeffrey Epstein, but Epstein's longtime friend and Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz was quick to discredit the victims. In 2006, he submitted research to investigators which claimed the victims had issues with drugs or alcohol and thus weren't reliable. Within weeks, 2 victims claimed to have been harassed or threatened. Soon after, lead investigators on the case stopped attending meetings with the prosecution. By April 2006, prosecutors had been told that the Florida State Attorney's Office was considering a plea deal for Epstein, in spite of the prosecutor's disapproval. On May 1st, however, the Palm Beach Police Department requested warrants for the arrest of Epstein on charges of 4 counts of unlawful sexual activity with a minor. Police also asked to charge Sarah Kellen, Epstein's assistant. Some department officials even wanted to arrest Haley Robson for her involvement. Feeling they had more than enough evidence to convict Epstein, the Palm Beach police chief told the state attorney's office he would dismiss himself if they did not follow through. In the months that followed, Florida prosecutors began to work out a non-prosecution agreement with Epstein in secret. By doing this in secret, and without the knowledge or consent of the victims, these prosecutors were willfully violating the Criminal Victims' Rights Act, the CVRA. This deal effectively limited Epstein's sentence to 1 state charge of prostitution, rather than the federal crime of trafficking. It also notably resolved co-conspirators from criminal liability. Texas attorney Michael Lowe describes the non-prosecution agreement as such. The NPA is very strange, mostly due to the government's grant of immunity to unknown and uncharged co-conspirators. This is unenforceable and borderline unethical. No lawyer can bargain on behalf of a client for whom he does not represent. That's what was done here. What if one of the alleged co-conspirators wanted to have their day in court? It seems unlikely, but every person charged has that right. Also, what if the government were to violate the NPA and prosecute one of the co-conspirators? Epstein couldn't seek to undo the NPA because he lacks the standing to do so. An NPA like this is simply not done and is unheard of in federal and state criminal law circles. This bizarre non-prosecution agreement would become a critical part of the civil lawsuits which followed. As if to further hinder themselves and frustrate the police, the prosecution also opted for a grand jury hearing instead of going directly to a trial jury. Paradoxically, the prosecution said that this was because their own case was weak. Palm Beach Police Chief Michael Rader told prosecutors that this was, quote, highly unusual, end quote, and asked them to remove himself from the case. By August 2006, the grand jury returned only a single charge of felony solicitation of prostitution, to which he pleaded not guilty. In a strange tie-in to the Swiss leaks and HSBC banking scandal, Jeffrey Epstein was discovered to have connected with several of his multi-million-dollar Swiss bank accounts during this exact period. In July of 2006, he also donated $25,000 to the Clinton Foundation. By September 2007, Epstein had formally signed an NPA. Finally, in June 2008, Epstein pled guilty to the single prostitution charge and was sentenced to 18 months in prison, for which he served only 13. He was not sent to a state prison, but rather was, quote, segregated in a vacant wing of the county stockade, end quote. In addition, quote, Epstein was let out on work release 6 days a week for up to 16 hours a day, end quote. During his year-long house arrest, Epstein flew around the country on his private jets to conduct business, with approval from the court and his probation officer. He also went to Home Depot and Sports Authority for large periods of time, all approved by his probation officer. Ex-U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta stated, Epstein appears to have received highly unusual treatment while in jail. Although the terms of confinement in a state prison are a matter appropriately left to the state of Florida and not federal authorities, without doubt, the treatment that he received while in state custody undermined the purpose of a jail sentence.
Epstein is now out of prison. His legal troubles are far from over.
Yes, several of his alleged victims are now suing. I sat down with one woman who says she was hired to massage Jeffrey Epstein as a teenager, but she says it turned into much more.
I felt disgusting. I wanted to go take a shower. I felt violated.
This woman says Jeffrey Epstein ruined her life.
He's done something really bad in my mind mentally where I now have to seek help.
She asks that we disguise her voice and not show her face. In a $50 million lawsuit, she's known as Jane Doe number 5. After years of silence, she's talking about the day she says Jeffrey Epstein paid her for a sensual massage. Jane says she was just a sophomore in high school, just 15 or 16 years old, when someone at her school told her how she could make some quick cash.
If you go to this guy's house for $200 and give him a massage for $200, basically it's an in and out thing. It's a massage, nothing bad about it.
Jane says she and a girl her age took a taxi to Epstein's house on Palm Beach. Jane says an assistant paid the driver and took them into an upstairs room. It had a massage table and a shower. And that's when Jane says Epstein walked in, completely naked.
He jumped in the shower and told me to remove my clothes down to my bra and my panties. We both were looking at each other like, what are we going to do now?
Jane says they were scared and they did as they were told. After the shower, Jane says Epstein wrapped himself in a towel stretched across the massage table face down. And Jane says she massaged his legs and her friend massaged his back.
He flipped over and his towel was gone. And my heart sank. I got really disturbed and nervous. He basically was, touching himself and touching my friend and trying to touch me. He also had, sex toys stored away.
There were sex toys there?
Yes.
Did he take some of them out?
Yes.
The entire time, Jane says Epstein talked sexually and repeated the same phrase over and over.
Just let it go. Just let it go. Just let it happen.
After the alleged massage, Jane says she and her friend were paid $200 each, then put into a taxi and sent away. She says for months, Epstein's assistant tried to get her to come back and service Epstein again, but she says she would either refuse or just ignore the call. Now, 22 years old, Jane says she's relying on therapy and her family to heal after what she calls the worst day of her life. Now, we have tried several times to get a comment from Epstein's attorney, Robert Critton. Our calls have not been returned.
Even during Jeffrey Epstein's criminal trial, victims were beginning to file lawsuits against him in civil court. Most significantly, some of these incidents would take place after the signing of Epstein's Non-Prosecution Agreement, which would thus void its terms. To date, there are around 40 known alleged cases of abuse against Epstein, with many likely more unknown victims. The victims were typically under the age of 18, with the youngest being 12. They were most often chosen for their age and low economic status. What's particularly remarkable to investigators is that nearly all of these victims have a similar story or sequence of events which led them to Jeffrey Epstein. Oftentimes, girls would be approached by other victims or Epstein's assistants and told they could make money by massaging an older man. Virginia Roberts, for instance, was approached by Ghislaine Maxwell while she worked at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago club in Palm Beach. If they agreed, then transportation would be arranged to Epstein's Palm Beach mansion. Once at the mansion, Epstein's assistants, either Ghislaine Maxwell or Sarah Kellen, would then take down the girls' contact information. The girls would then be led upstairs to a massaging room to meet Epstein. As they traveled up the stairs, victims would see nude and sexually graphic photographs of other young girls. The existence of this photo collection would later be corroborated by investigators from the Palm Beach Police Department. Jane Doe No. 102's attorneys also stated such a collection could be found in all 6 of Epstein's homes, as well as his personal computers. Victims and members of the Palm Beach Police Department observed that Epstein had hidden cameras placed throughout his home. Other than their obvious use to create and distribute child pornography, another crime, victims like Virginia Roberts have suggested they were also used to blackmail Epstein's associates. This will be elaborated on later. Once the victim had been brought to the massage room, she would then be greeted by Epstein and oftentimes another girl. Epstein and the other female would then direct the victim through massaging Epstein and removing their clothes. After removing their clothes, victims would be sexually assaulted by Jeffrey Epstein. Victims would then be paid hundreds to thousands of dollars. Following the assault, both immediately after and then for periods of months to years, Epstein would then coerce the girl into continuing their services as a prostitute. He would request the victim quit their job and offer to hire them as a massage therapist. In at least one case, the victim's father was aware of Epstein's request to have her at the home, but allowed it under the pretense that Ghislaine Maxwell was teaching his daughter massage therapy. Once employed, Epstein would take the girls on trips to his mansion and destinations around the world. In most instances, these underage employees would then be continuously abused several times a day. To make matters even more grim, and more of a federal crime, mind you, the Jane Does also revealed that Epstein abused minors from all over the world, not just girls he took from Palm Beach. In one case, Epstein had 3 12-year-old girls from France delivered to him by a friend. After being sexually assaulted, the girls were flown back to France the next day. Further still, Jeffrey Epstein would then let his friends and associates sexually assault these employees as well. Another significance to these lawsuits is that at least some indicate Epstein's trafficking activities continued even after he signed his non-prosecution agreement, voiding it even further. The case of Jane Doe 43 versus Epstein contains this noteworthy statement. Remarkably, however, as this case will highlight, Defendant Epstein and his co-defendants, including the other defendants named herein, did not abandon their sex trafficking enterprise even while they were under state and federal investigation for crimes committed in violation of U.S. Section 1591. Among other laws, and even as defendants and their attorneys were busy arguing Epstein's innocence and publicly defaming his victims as liars. Rather, defendants merely changed their style. Instead of targeting local Palm Beach, Florida high school girls, the defendants transported young females from other places in the U.S. and abroad and brought them to defendant Epstein's mansion in New York and his private island in the Virgin Islands. The dockets for these cases are available to the public, and many of these court documents can be found on Document Cloud, the Internet Archive, the Pizzagate Wiki, or have been backed up on the blockchain through Steemit. Victims commonly claim that many of Epstein's assistants, employees, and pilots were aware of the abuse and cooperated with Epstein to hide this behavior from the police. These would become known as the unidentified co-conspirators, who were inexplicably given special protections under Epstein's NPA. After examining the countless cases against Epstein, however, it is possible to determine at least some of these co-conspirators. First and foremost is Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's one-time lover, best friend, and personal assistant for decades. Publicly, Maxwell is a famous British socialite who founded the environmental group the Terramar Project. She has had many notable and close friendships with such figures as Prince Andrew and Bill Clinton. Ghislaine Maxwell was also an associate of Donald Trump and was seen with him on numerous occasions, including this 1997 photo of the two in New York. As we have seen from victim statements, Maxwell also used Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort as a location to target young girls. What Ghislaine Maxwell doesn't want the world to know, however, is that according to statements made by at least 6 Jane Does, she was critical to their recruitment and continued abuse. In some cases, Maxwell even participated in the sexual abuse by coercing the young girls to continue when they were unsure or simply couldn't any longer. According to a statement by Jane Doe 43, Defendant Maxwell was for decades the highest-ranking employee of the defendant's sex trafficking enterprise. She herself recruited young females, oversaw and trained other recruiters on how best to recruit girls for sex, developed and executed schemes designed to recruit young females, and ensured that all participants of the defendant's sex trafficking scheme acted in certain specific ways in order to advance the purposes of the scheme and conceal it from law enforcement. Sarah Kellen, now Sarah Kensington, was the personal assistant to Jeffrey Epstein for several years, alongside Ghislaine Maxwell. Most notable about Sarah Kellen's involvement in these crimes is that she, not Ghislaine Maxwell, was directly named by the Palm Beach Police Department in their 2006 probable cause affidavit during this criminal trial. This makes her easily one of the most conspicuous of the unidentified co-conspirators, protected by Epstein's NPA. At least 6 different victims reported that Sarah Kellen was not so much involved in the direct coercion or abuse of the victims, but rather served a logistical role by recording each victim's contact information and arranging their transportation. Some girls described Sarah, not Ghislaine, as the person who led them up to Epstein's massage room. Even if she did not partake directly in the abuse, however, her knowledge of the situation and continued assistance would still make her guilty of both federal and international human trafficking. Today, Kellen has changed her name to Sarah Kensington and founded SLK Designs, a design firm headquartered in a building owned by Jeffrey Epstein's brother. She has never spoken out about Epstein's abuses, but did plead the fifth when questioned about her involvement during Epstein's criminal trial. Nadia Marcinkova was a Yugoslavian model that Epstein acquired from an early age to help recruit and manage other younger girls. One victim told Palm Beach police that Nadia Marcinkova had actually been purchased from her parents when she was 15. One victim also quoted Epstein as saying Marcinkova was his, quote, sex slave, end quote. Nadia is also unique in that several victims claim she directly participated in their sexual assaults. Epstein would watch as Nadia and the victims performed all kinds of sexual behaviors until he inevitably would join in. The accounts of this abuse are among the most graphic of all the abuses recorded by the victims. Those curious enough can easily find the sordid details, but the accounts themselves are significant in that at least one 16-year-old victim claims to have been raped by Epstein during the encounter with Nadia. Rape would be a separate criminal charge in addition to solicitation of prostitution and trafficking. Nadia Marcinkova was another individual alongside Sarah Kellen who pled the fifth when questioned by police in 2006. Today, Nadia Marcinkova is a licensed Gulfstream pilot for the same model in which she flew with Epstein countless times. She apparently acquired these skills from Epstein's pilots, who would occasionally allow her to fly the craft. Marcinkova is also the CEO of Avaloop, a website selling discounted flying lessons and other deals related to aviation. Avaloop is headquartered in the same building as SLK Designs, which again was owned by Epstein's brother. Adriana Ross is a model who was brought from her home in Poland to work in Epstein's mansion in 2002 when she was 17. Although she was a key witness in Epstein's trafficking enterprise, as well as possibly being a victim herself, she invoked the Fifth Amendment when questioned by authorities, just as Nadia Marcinkova and Sarah Kellen did. Leslie Groff is named in a number of lawsuits surrounding Jeffrey Epstein, including Jane Doe No. 43's suit against Epstein, Maxwell, Kellen, and Marcinkova. She is described by victims as an enforcer with a role similar to that of Sarah Kellen. Defendant Groff coordinated schedules between defendant Epstein and various young females used for sex, made travel arrangements for the girls, tended to their living needs, and communicated with them in order to maintain their compliance with the rules of behavior imposed upon them by the enterprise. Groff was so important to the enterprise, in fact, that in 2005, the New York Times reported Epstein bought her a Mercedes-Benz E320 and a full-time nanny so that she could continue her work as his assistant when she became pregnant. To this day, she continues to work as an executive assistant to Darren K. Indyke, a New York attorney that has represented Epstein and his companies. Alan Dershowitz, a former member of the O.J. Simpson defense team, also defended Jeffrey Epstein during his criminal trial in Palm Beach. The two had been friends for many years, and in fact, Dershowitz had his own room in Epstein's New York home. Dershowitz almost immediately tried to discredit all of Jeffrey Epstein's victims. Dershowitz would make daily appearances on mainstream news programs like Nancy Grace, claiming the case and subsequent suits were entirely false. Dershowitz also presented research to investigators that he obtained through the victims' social media accounts, which suggested some of them had used marijuana and alcohol. Despite his efforts, however, Epstein still eventually pled guilty to at least one charge. Not long after the criminal case had ended, Virginia Roberts came forward with claims that Dershowitz had been one of the individuals she was lent to by Epstein. In response, Dershowitz attempted to get Roberts' attorneys disbarred for misconduct and claimed she was guilty of perjury. The attorneys then sued Dershowitz for defamation. The cases were ultimately settled in 2016. But it did reveal some inconsistencies and anomalies in Dershowitz's testimony. For instance, Dershowitz had told the New York Daily News on January 21st, 2015 that, quote, "I never got a massage from anybody. It's made up out of whole cloth," end quote. The very next day, he informed a local news station that, quote, "I kept my underwear on during the massage," end quote, and that, "I've always acknowledged I had one massage. I said that from day one." As a side note, the phrase made up out of whole cloth was used by Dershowitz repeatedly during the defamation lawsuit. It should also be noted that attorney and legal expert Tamara Tabo points out that despite claiming to have never met Virginia Roberts at all, Dershowitz had indeed received a massage while at Jeffrey Epstein's home in New York during one of Roberts' visits. In Dershowitz's deposition, he also made the ironically baseless claim that Roberts' attorneys were part of a $1 billion extortion scheme against Leslie Wexner. Although it is difficult to determine if Dershowitz truly had a direct role in the abuse of Epstein's victims, his conflict of interest in the case and inconsistent statements to the press and lawyers cast a shadow of doubt on his intentions and credibility. Jean-Luc Brunel, the longtime friend of Jeffrey Epstein, has been named by some victims as an individual who also procured and assaulted underage girls with Epstein. Jane Doe number 3, later found to be Virginia Roberts, stated Brunel worked with Epstein in the international transportation of minors. Brunel would lure young girls in with offers to become models. These are not the first claims of sexual abuse and exploitation of models by Jean-Luc Brunel. A now lost 1988 60 Minutes special featured a story in which several women claimed to have been drugged and raped by Brunel himself. In a strange turn of events, however, Brunel sued his friend Epstein in 2015, stating that the case had cost his modeling agency millions. In this suit, oddly enough, he implicates Epstein in the sexual assault of multiple underage girls. Brunel also implicated the both of them in a plot with Epstein to dodge making a federal deposition during the criminal trial. Perhaps there's been a change of heart? One of the more significant witnesses to these cases has been Alfredo Rodriguez. Rodriguez was Jeffrey Epstein's personal butler during the period in which he trafficked underage girls. He is most famous for being the author of The Little Black Book, a list of Epstein's personal contacts which included annotations on which ones were involved in his erotic massage racket. Rodriguez had maintained this contact book in the event that he would ever need to use the information against Epstein to protect himself. On June 18, 2010, Alfredo Rodriguez was sentenced to 18 months for obstruction of justice when it was discovered that he had withheld the book from police in the earlier criminal trial. Rodriguez was actually trying to sell the book to one of the witnesses for $50,000 when they informed the FBI in 2009. This led to a subsequent undercover investigation, which then led to his arrest and sentencing. The Little Black Book has since been published online, and annotations on those involved in the erotic massage trade, including dozens of massage parlors, and also including such names as Donald Trump, former New Mexico Governors Bruce King and Bill Richardson, Jean-Luc Brunel, nephew of George Soros, Peter Soros, Leslie Wexner, Courtney Love, and former Miss Sweden Eva Anderson Dubon. Ghislaine Maxwell, Sarah Kellen, and Alan Dershowitz were also included in the group of circled contacts. Although far from the only victim of Jeffrey Epstein, Virginia Roberts has remained the most vocal and descriptive witness known to the public. Virginia Roberts was born in 1984 and met Jeffrey Epstein in 1989 when she was just 15. At the time, she was a changing room assistant at Mar-a-Lago, a country club owned by Donald Trump, in Palm Beach, Florida, and met Epstein's assistant, Ghislaine Maxwell. After expressing a desire to become a masseuse, Maxwell brought Roberts to Epstein's home, where she gave him a massage that, quote, turned into a sexual encounter, end quote. The following is taken from Roberts' account submitted to the court on December 30th, 2014, in which she is known as Jane Doe number 3. When Jane Doe number 3 began giving Epstein a massage, Epstein and Maxwell turned it into a sexual encounter, as they had done with many other victims. Epstein then became enamored with Jane Doe number 3, and with the assistance of Maxwell, converted her into what is commonly referred to as a sex slave. Epstein kept Jane Doe number 3 as his sex slave from about 1999 through 2002, where she managed to escape to a foreign country and hide out from Epstein and his co-conspirators for years. From 1999 through 2002, Epstein frequently sexually abused Jane Doe number 3, not only in West Palm Beach, but also in New York, New Mexico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, in international airspace on his Epstein's private planes, and elsewhere. Epstein also sexually trafficked the then minor Jane Doe, making her available for sex to politically connected and financially powerful people. Epstein's purposes in lending Jane Doe, along with other young girls, to such powerful people was to ingratiate himself with them for business, personal, political, and financial gain, as well as to obtain potential blackmail information. Virginia's deposition goes on to name a list of people she was lent to in this manner, including Alan Dershowitz, Ghislaine Maxwell, Prince Andrew, Duke of York, and Jean-Luc Brunel, as well as many other powerful men, including numerous prominent American politicians, powerful business executives, foreign presidents, a well-known prime minister, and other world leaders. Epstein required Jane Doe number 3 to describe the events that she had with these men so that he could potentially blackmail them. Roberts has been intensely scrutinized and criticized since these claims were made public. While her accounts are indeed graphic and difficult for many to understand, however, they remain consistent and can be supported by other witnesses and evidence. One of the most bizarre parts of the story is ironically one of the easiest to prove circumstantially. This peculiar photo from 2001 clearly depicts Prince Andrew holding Virginia Roberts, then a 17-year-old high school student in Palm Beach, with Ghislaine Maxwell in the background. In addition to the corroborating testimonies of Jane Does 1, 2, and 4, pilot logs given to the court by Jeffrey Epstein's pilot, Dave Rogers, can also independently verify much of Virginia's testimony about this time period. Virginia Roberts first appears with her full name in the pilot's logs on January 2001 on a trip to the Virgin Islands. At this time, Roberts would have been 16 years old. It's interesting to note, however, that a Virginia also flew with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell to the Virgin Islands on November 14th and December 14th in 2000, following the same general pattern of flights from Palm Beach. During this period, Roberts would also be flown to France, Morocco, Britain, and Grenada. When Roberts turned 19, she met a man in Thailand that she quickly married. She fled her life with Jeffrey Epstein, but her troubles with him were just beginning. Roberts, now Joffrey, wouldn't return to the U.S. until she started joining suits as Jane Doe number 3. Alan Dershowitz and Ghislaine Maxwell tried to discredit this testimony, but recently a lawsuit was settled in Roberts' favor against Maxwell for defamation. Dershowitz continues to threaten a suit of his own, but is yet to do so. To this day, Roberts Joffrey is continuing to fight the United States government in an almost decade-long lawsuit asserting that the Criminal Victims' Rights Act was violated by Epstein's Non-Prosecution Agreement. I hope this film provided some helpful or at least new information to you, but the truth is, the real story of Jeffrey Epstein is still yet to be told. Until he sees a day in criminal court faced with charges of trafficking, we may never know the full story. His wealth has made him nearly invincible for decades, but the times are changing.
I would like to dedicate this next song to the one and only love of my life, me. You are my fire, the one desire, believe when I say I want it that way. Tell me why ain't nothing but a heartache. Tell me why ain't nothing but a mistake. Tell me why I never wanna hear you say I want it that way. Everybody,
oh, it's a medley. Oh, he's got hits.
rock your body right. Back streets back. Now throw your hands up in the air. Wave them around like you just don't care. If you want it, let me hear you.